Hey everyone, I'm Jay Bernard, and I'm really happy to be part of this conversation around destabilising the archives. I come to you from Belgium, where the King, just a few days ago, gave a speech, which he, in response to the protests that have been going on around the world, sparked by the BLM's activism, essentially. He came out and acknowledged that Belgium had played a regretful part in Congo's brutal colonial history. But he didn't name his own ancestor, Leopold II. And yet, when you walk around Belgium, Leopold is everywhere. There's a long road just up, not far from this apartment where it's called Leopold II. And I walked down it just a few weeks ago, and I started to sort of think about what it means for there to be information in archives, and the constitution of our kind of built environment and our the world that we kind of operate in, because there's something fundamentally perverse about the king not naming another king when discussing the atrocities of that king. It brought together so many of the problems of acknowledgement, recognition, and responsibility that the archives bring up. I suppose my central question is, how do you move from the storehouse of information that the archives are? How do you move from the archive as a kind of mechanism of the state by which things are both stored, suppressed, destroyed, as in the case of the Windrush scandal, but also brought up at will? How do you move away from the archives as a kind of storehouse, and how do you bridge that gap so that it becomes knowledge? What are the practices and the mechanisms and the processes by which we can continually acknowledge the unacknowledged knowledge? Did you just hear that? How can we acknowledge the unacknowledged knowledge? But you see what I'm trying to say here. There's a kind of problem. There's a fundamental problem I've been trying to grapple with, which is, how do you move away from accumulation with no burden of interpretation or understanding towards understanding? There's something about the pulling down of a statue that is extremely powerful, because then it leaves a space. And I'm really interested in what we do with that space. I'm really interested in the practices that we develop so that memorials and the act of memory, vigils and so on, that they accumulate to become something more than the sum of their parts, something more than storage, something more than something fleeting. And actually become embodied practices by which we can move forward and move the conversation forward, and also reimagine societies as well. Now, those are really big, huge questions, of course, and I kind of started to addressing these questions in the film that you're now going to see, which is called Something Said, where I was trying to think about not only the history, but how I internalize that history, and then what that history means in terms of understanding my relationship to black womanhood and to the suffering of black women, even as I transition, even as I change, and even as I question a lot of ideas and categories around sex and gender. Like, what is that process, and how can we engage with it more deeply? How can we embody it and internalize it? And how can it be something that we do in the world almost on a daily basis? Because at the moment, it's something that is forced, it's something that is specialized, it's something that is specific. Whereas I wonder what the world would look like if acknowledgement of history and if an understanding of history was central to our discussions about who we are as people. So that was a kind of slightly long-winded way of putting that. But I'm really interested in the broad discussions. I'm really interested in kind of what other people say around this. Yeah, and I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
With those 13 dead, murdered at 439 New Cross Road on the 18th of January.
I'd like to set the scene. Nearly 40 years ago, there was a girl, and it was her 16th birthday, and there was a fire, and she perished. And I read about that girl and the violence at the center of her story. You might say this is a letter to Yvonne Ruddock, and that the scene is New Cross, January 18th, 1981. It is the morning, cold and early in the history we are about to witness. There's a girl, and there are her friends, and there's a party, and there are candles, and rum, and coke, and a banging sound system, and boys toasting and cracking jokes over the mic. And there is England, stretched out in its frosty bed, dark as a lidded eye. And there's the girl, 16, coming into her body that listens and moves to the music. The sound systems back then were sentinels in the dark, hailing the black sky creaking with light. She knew herself to be a girl, and she believed she'd grow into a woman. Something else happened.
This is an area that has experienced a number of racist attacks. A mass movement has developed had the military incidents around this festival, police inaction, and equally over so many murders of blacks in the country. Attacks and this is one area where we said the buck has to stop. In spite of that, we had the suppression of the information concerning the firebombing. Those are the tactics we know the police use. With those 13 which are really tactics to prevent us, the people, from showing the extent of our indignation, the extent of our solidarity with those 13 dead. A mass movement has developed in the country around this question of the police inaction over so many murders of blacks in the country. And this is one where we said the buck has to stop.
There is a stillness at the center of the story. In a dark room, on a winter's night, something happened that no one will ever know. The London you knew has disappeared forever. You'd be a grown woman by now. You're not much younger than my mother. You shared this earth with my grandmother. Maybe you met eyes in the street, stood near each other at a market stall. I spent weeks in the archives, imagining how you went about the world, reading through the interviews, listening to the tapes, trying to piece together a picture of who you were and what you came to represent. The fire that night was a moment of transformation. It was part of the creation story of where we are today. I would not be who I am without it, and yet I feel a strange discomfort writing to you. My own historical moment feels like an echo of yours. It haunts me, informs me, has become the subtle harmonic in my thinking and my speech. The climate in this country is shifting. It looks and feels like the past, and the more I read about you, about the fire, the more my body becomes attuned. The more this history feels like a damaged bone in my body, able to tell the weather, aching in anticipation of a coming storm. After the fire, there was a protest through the streets. Crowds chanted, 13 dead, nothing said. But that is no longer true. We will continue to say something new, something in memory of you. They wanted you out, Yvonne, but now I can't help but think that they want to keep some of us in. We're entering a new age of isolationism. My fear is not that I will be kicked out, but that I will not make it out. That the body I am coming to inhabit is too aberrant, too strange, too violently altered. I am already marked as different. To be racialized is always to be different, to be shackled to another time and place, to be a ghost. But in a few short weeks, I will have changed again. I will have gained 2 long scars across my chest. And when I am laid out on the mortician's table, everyone looking will know that I chose ambiguity, complicated my already fraught relationship with the state, with history. My chest as a refutation, permanent in my skin. Still, I carry you deep inside me, and I can never disavow the little black girl I was, the black women who dreamed me into existence. What does it mean to alter my female body, to masculinize, when I know the history of black women in this country, when I know how painful it has been? My body shifts, and I must say goodbye to it as it once was. I write over it with scars, the story of what might have been. What might have been. I often lie there, thinking about it.